All right, we are live again here with Lukas Reubbelke. Lukas is going to be talking to us about setting up your Angular app with Sleight of Hand and ngAnimate. Lukas is a developer, hacker, community backer, author and blogger, console logger, author of AngularJS in Action for Manning Publications. He builds awesome things and changes lives at Udacity. He's also a regular panelist on Adventures in Angular, and it's always a pleasure to talk to Lukas. So we will let you take it away, Lukas.
All right. Good morning / afternoon / lunch. Can everybody hear me okay?
There's a slight delay, so I will say yes for everybody.
All right. So, Chuck, I'm going to count on you to keep me honest and just presume that everybody can hear okay. It's always a tough act following Shy. He actually asked to switch time slots, and I said he wanted to go on my time. What I didn't know is that he wanted to actually go for both of our times. So once that guy gets going, man, he is hard to stop. But excellent material. We are going to go in a different direction here and talk about animations. Animations originally with Angular was kind of an afterthought. And so let me actually share my screen. I'll just share a little story that kind of was my intro to like animations in Angular and whatnot. So when I first got into Angular, I started to dig into it, to learn, to wrap my mind around it. And I realized very quickly that it was really designed for kind of line of business applications, stuff that, you're creating, read, updating, deleting data, etc. But I come from a Flash background. And so I was used to doing a lot of, kind of full screen immersive like animation websites in Flash. And so I said, well, I'm going to do that. And so I decided, well, I'm going to create this this example with these bouncing balls. And let's see if this is even in live here. We can see this. But this was kind of my first foray into Angular and making things move around. And so this is where I started. But if I go way down here at the bottom, wait for it. I think this one will move.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you may want to zoom in a little bit so people can read the code.
Yeah, so this is completely tangential. This is not the point. It was just these bouncy balls, and I showed, I think it was Mishko or Igor, and they're like, why would you want to do that? And my answer was like, well, like, why not? Why not do this? And interesting enough, this example became actually one of the benchmarks example they used when people said, well, binding is slow. The Angular team went and actually used this as one of the examples for that. All right, so anyways, that was originally in Angular, we had no mechanism to actually do any animation. And real quick, all right, Kent, I see that we're having, let me see if I can drop this down just a little bit. Let's go with, so I just changed my resolution. Let's see, let me know how that looks in a second. I don't want to go down a rabbit trail here, but the point is, originally with Angular, there was no mechanism for animations. Is that I had to do it, completely in the, within a directive. Was very complicated. And from there, Matthias came up with the idea of ngAnimate, and he created that, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And so, with that said, let's start my slides. So what we're going to talk about today is stepping up your Angular app with Sleight of Hand and ngAnimate. And so what we're going to do is just take some really simple examples. We're going to show how to add them in, or basically take kind of static things and very simply add in animations using ngAnimate. So I've already been introduced, author of AngularJS in Action. egghead author, panelist on Adventures in Angular, duh. More importantly, I blog at onehungrymind.com, and so if anybody wants to, take this dialogue, or I say something, completely controversial, or you want to have a conversation, catch me on my blog. And I have actually a ton of other examples for animations here, as well as you can catch me on Twitter at Simpleton. So let's talk about ngAnimate, what it is. So we're going to do just a bit of theory, and then we're going to jump right into some code. So ngAnimate is essentially what I would consider to be a CSS directive that you can apply to an existing animation. So it's class-based, and you can apply it to existing animations, and it's very non-intrusive. And so we can take something that already exists, and by attaching strategically classes to our code, then you get animation. But the beauty of this is that ngAnimate is actually just a set of hooks for handing off the heavy lifting to either JavaScript or CSS. And so when you start to realize that this is really, ngAnimate is just a kind of a candy-coated shell that you kind of wrap around the actual animation logic, it becomes very easy to start to integrate with other third-party things such as Greensock, which happens to be my favorite animation platform. And so ngAnimate comes in kind of 2.5 flavors. You have your JavaScript animations, which we'll see, but then you can also do CSS animations via transitions or through keyframe animations. Now, I'm just going to make an admission, a confession right from the beginning. I am primarily a JavaScript guy. I love my animations in JavaScript. And so therefore, that's what I tend to gravitate towards. Or if I'm doing something really simple, I'll tend to gravitate towards CSS transitions. And so kind of keyframe animations, I find them to be a bit verbose and limited. So if I want to do something complex, I tend to go right to JavaScript, or if it's simple, I'll stay within CSS transitions. So I'm going to probably not get into keyframe animations too much. I apologize for that, but that's just kind of my personal preference is CSS transitions for simple animations, JavaScript for the more complex things. And so when you're approaching animations within Angular, there are really kind of two things that you just need to remember and keep in mind. The first one is that there are a set of events that you can hook into to hook in your animations, and then you just need to memorize the conventions for your animation. So once you understand the events and the convention, then it becomes a lot easier to start to integrate those into your application. And so when I say events, you have kind of 5 main events that we're going to see. And it's enter, leave, move, and then you have add class and remove class. And so enter is triggered when an element actually enters the DOM, and leave is triggered when it leaves the DOM. So this is really good for like ngIf, ngShowHide. And then you'll also see ngMove come into play when you're dealing with ngRepeat. And so elements actually have to move within the DOM, as well as you can trigger an animation when a class is added to an element or when it's removed from an element. And so those are kind of the 5 basic events that if you can kind of just keep in the forefront of your mind, it makes it really easy to approach how you're going to hook your animations into your application. And now the convention is basically class-based, and this is for transitions. It becomes actually a little bit easier as you move from transitions to keyframe animations and then into JavaScript. But the idea is you have a class, you have an event, and you have a state. And so you'll start with your base class. So let's say this is repeat item. So this is trivial, whatever your base class is. But then you'll have an event. So in this case, we are wanting to apply a class on ngLeave. So this is when something leaves the DOM, and then you have a state. So it'll start at ngLeave, but then once that state has been actively applied, then you have ngLeave active, or you're in this active state, or this class has been actively applied. And so you can think of your event as kind of your starting point and your state as your ending point. And so let's see what this looks like in a code sample. And actually, just real quick, I'm going to just check the chats and make sure that nothing is blowing up here. All right, great. So back into my slides. And so in this case, we have repeat item, ngEnter, ngLeave. So we just want to apply a transition, a basic transition to this. We could also apply it to repeat item as well. So there's a little bit of variability you can have there. But we have our base class, repeat item. Then we have the event, so ngEnter or ngLeave. And then what I've done here to just for space is I've stacked these together, but we're saying when the ngEnter event has been triggered, start with an opacity of 0, and then when ngEnter.ngEnter active is completed, or this class is now applied, set the opacity to 1. And then if you read it backwards, is when it's leaving the DOM, so ngLeave is the event that's been triggered, then ngLeave active, then it will go from an opacity of 1 to an opacity of 0. And so you can actually stack these together to just kind of make it more condensed, because a lot of times you'll have a kind of a linear transition or an animation of like, I want it to fade in, and then when it's done, I want it to fade out. And so we were able to kind of cascade our styles here to accomplish this. But the main point is that you can see your events, ngEnter leave, and then you can see the starting and finishing point that we're assigning using the actual state. So this would be ngEnter active and ngLeave active. This is a transition version of this. And so this becomes a little bit simpler in the sense that you no longer have to define states in your styles because the keyframes handle that for you. So my special animation, so we're going to listen to ngEnter, and we just want to go from red to blue. And so then we just define a keyframe for kind of your standard browser, and then you have to do it for WebKit as well. And I find, though, if you're doing complex animations, because you have to define this twice, it tends to get verbose. And so it's easier for me to go with JavaScript. And so to see the convention in JavaScript, we use the animation method on the module. So that's just a convenience method. And we're going to create an animation called fade. Now remember, animations across the board are class-based even within JavaScript. So you have to put the dot when you define your animation. So in this case, it's dot fade. And now we can see the events that I mentioned earlier. So you have enter. So this is called when something enters the DOM, leave, move. Then you have add class and remove class. But then you also have animations that you can call before a class is added or removed. And so this is just a real high level look at just kind of the conventions that we're going to see in a bit with some examples. And so just to lock this down just a little bit further is on your enter, leave, and move events. The starting CSS class is ng-enter, ng-leave, ng-move, and then you just append a -active for the ending CSS class. And then you can see these directives that fire this is so ng-repeat, ng-include, ng-if, ng-view. So this is really anything that is actually manipulating the DOM. And then same thing about hiding and showing an element, and as well as if you are adding or removing a class. There is one other table here that I'm not going to get into, but you can actually trigger these manually using the Animate service. And so these 3 tables that I have here, I've gotten these from the Year of Moose site, and I just put them in here for reference. So I'll actually export these slides out at the end of my talk and make them available to Chuck so he can send them to anybody who wants them. But these were from the yearofmoo.com site. Okay, with that said, I think it's time for us to get into some code and start playing around with some animations. So if you go to this link right here, it'll send you to a zip file that you can download. So let me just also grab this and paste this into chats here. There we go. And so these are the working slides, or the working examples that everybody can download. They're completely finished, and so you can start to dig in, and they will work. But I'm actually going to walk through and offer some clarity around that. So now with that said, let us kick this off. And so once you download these zips, this is kind of what you should see is I have a few examples, 5 to be exact. And so the first one we're going to start out with is the UI router one. And so if anybody has seen the UI router plunk that is out there when you go to the site, this is essentially what this is I've just repurposed it slightly, but you basically have these routes. You can show your list, and pretty straightforward. And this is basically a direct port from what I got from Plunker. Now, the one difference is that I've added in an animations CSS file, and when you are using Angular Animate, because this is not part of the core, you need to include Angular Animate, and then you need to make sure to inject that as a submodule into your actual code. And now notice, other than that, I have not made any modifications to this application. It is, albeit very simplistic, but I have added Angular Animate, and I've injected the ngAnimate submodule into the actual application. I've also included an animations.css file, and that's where we're going to put our animations. So we're going to target the UI view element. So we'll just go UI view, like so, and we'll just go ngEnter, as that is essentially the event that we want to target. And so I don't have to just sit here and type this out. I'm going to just paste this in here. So I will occasionally just paste things in favor of actually wasting time letting everybody watch me type. But what I'm simply doing is saying I want to apply a transition to this class to transition all properties for a half a second, and I want to use the ease in and out tween, or the easing function rather. Okay, so from here, let's actually set our starting state for ngEnter, and we'll set opacity to 0. And let's go ahead and set our stopping point. So this is going to be, here's our state. We're going to say once you're here, we're going to set it to 1. Back here, refresh the page. And now you can see you get this nice little transition here, and we've added just a few lines of CSS. And we actually haven't modified the application very much other than to make ngAnimate available to our application and add in an animations file. And we're able to say, anytime that this is triggered, we want to just start from 0 and make the opacity from 0 to 1. So basically fade it in. And from here, then you can kind of play. Like if you want to slow it down, then we'll just go with maybe 1 second, or actually that would be very, very fast. Let's go with a whole second here. First the page, and from here, then you get a little bit more of a slower animation. But I think this reads pretty well, is that we're creating our transition. Then we're saying when we start on ng enter, let's go with opacity of 0. And then let's finish with an opacity of 1. So very, very simple, simplistic animation example here. But when you have kind of a static application, this is a really good place to target low-hanging fruit to really step it up. And so it's amazing when you just start fading things in and out, really nice and subtly, what that does to the user experience. And they've scientifically proven that when somebody believes, or when something looks better, people respond to it better, and they perceive that it works better. And so this is really easy. We have 12 lines of CSS, and this could actually really have quite the impact in your application as you build it out. It's like, oh, we're just fading things in and out, but to the end user, it may make a huge difference. So moving on, let's go to our next example. And we're going to introduce GreenSock now. And what I have here is, let me just show you what this looks like real quick. Go here, let me just put this out. So just a real simple list of menu items. And so in the code, let's close all these, and I have a main controller with just an array of menu items. And then what I've also done is just created a really simple directive to just maintain the state for that individual menu item. So it's pretty straightforward that we're just laying it out. And then on mouse center, we're just setting active to true. And on mouse sleeve, we're setting active to false. We're displaying the title. And now I have this class that I've called menu animation. And so what we have here now is I want to target that particular class. So now when I say that I believe animations are a lot like class-based directives, it becomes really clear here that this is indeed the case, is that we've defined basically a custom directive, or we're augmenting the standard behavior using this CSS class here. And so we're saying .animation, and we want to trigger the before add class and before remove class events here. So for each of these, we get a particular function that provides us helpful information that we can use to do our animation. So just like in a directive, we get the element, but we also get the class name, and then we get this done method that we need to call when our animation is done to let Angular know that it's free to move on. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying if the class name equals highlight, then we're going to put our animation in. If not, just ignore it. The reason being is that this will trigger for every single class that is animated, and we only want to write animations for a specific class. In this case, it is highlight. And so we're using ng class, and we're saying when active is true, apply this class. When active is false, take it off. And so I love to actually use the class-based events to do this, because it's really easy. It's ng class. When you add something based on some bit of logic, then you can also, in conjunction, trigger an animation. So within the class name highlight, this is where we're going to put our animation. And so we're going to use green sock here, and we're going to use tween light in this case. And so you have tween light, tween max, and kind of as it implies, tween light is a lighter version of tween max. Tween max has a lot of extra things that generally I do not need. But if you want to see the difference of those, definitely check out the greensock.com site, and they lay it out. But from here, we're simply saying tween light dot to. So we're saying we want to move an element from here to here, or rather just wherever it is to this point. We're going to pass in the element, and so this is really nice integration here. Is that I don't have to do a jQuery, query the DOM to find out where it is. Angular gives me the element that I want to animate on. So we're going to go with 2 seconds, and from here we're just going to pass in an actual set of properties that we want to animate on. So we're going to go with color, and we'll go with 89CD25. I believe that's what I used. And we'll go with or left. And so just like how in directives, camel case becomes snake case in the HTML, within tween light that you'll use camel case instead of snake case. So that's why you see the border left with the capital L. We're going to go solid, and we'll also go 89CD25. And we're going to make sure to call done on complete. Let's just go ahead and do the same thing for, actually, let's just see what this looks like real quick. Let's just go up here. So you can see we get this animation in, and all that's happening is we're saying, take the element, change the color to this, which is basically this green, and we're going to take the border left and make it 20 pixels solid, and also make it green. And then when it's done, call done. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to copy this and paste this in. From here, let's just set this back to this gray here. We'll go back to 10 pixels, and we'll make this just a slightly different gray. And now we're saying, for remove class, before this class is removed, go ahead and run this animation. So let's go back here, and let's refresh. And so now, by simply adding a class and then defining basically the JavaScript animations around that, you get kind of this neat menu item animation. Also, you'll notice that I've set 0.2 for the animation in, but what you can do here is, what I like to do is actually do the outro animation, make it a little slower. So now you kind of get this ripple effect as it goes through, because it's animating in faster and then it's animating out a bit slower. So I think it's pretty neat, but again, we have a bit of boilerplate here to set up the hooks, but the actual animation itself is this right here, which if I were really going for being concise, is I'd put this all on a line. I could say, oh, look at what I've done in, basically I've done these animations in 2 lines of code. And exactly, like Chuck, I totally agree that, it's really important to add in visual cues. And so now we have an opportunity to start to add in micro interactions to step up your UX to a completely different level. And generally in line of business apps, if you've ever, been somewhere and you're doing, some dashboard at, some company in a cubicle, like those applications are not very pretty. They look like engineers wrote them. But we have an opportunity, because that bar is so low, to come in here, spice it up with just a bit of animations, just little subtle cues, and to completely take that experience to the next level. And so actually, speaking of micro interactions, let's go to our next example. And so this is an example that came from, I'm just going to pop this up here. I'm a really big fan of MailChimp. I think that they've done a really good job of really just nailing their UX and really doing a really good job. And so I wanted to take their login form and kind of play around with it and see if I could recreate it in Angular. And so this is going to be the starting point here. And so you can see when you click through, you get these, kind of these prompts like, what's your email address? Hey, this field is required. So, put my email address in here. And you can see now that the prompt is gone. So not only is your prompting the user to do something, but you are, letting them know like, hey, you haven't satisfied this condition. And then, like for instance, in our password, it needs one lowercase character, one uppercase character, one number. As you start to tick these things off, you can start to see that like, hey, these things, like these are the requirements. And then we'll go one special character, and then you can get like that. And so already I think it's in a much better place than just a standard vanilla form. But I started to sit down and say, how could we actually spice this up even a little bit more? And so we'll hop back into the code. And before I get too far into this, I got to give, Kent Dodds, or rather, forgive me, heresy, Kent C. Dodds, a shout out, because he really took some time to help polish this out with me. And so thank you, Kent. I love you. You're the best. And so this is how we're going to add in animations for this particular thing. Now, what we're doing here real quick is I've already actually added a class for it. And it's called message animation. And what I'm triggering on is using ngMessage is I'm saying when this div comes in for this message, let's go ahead and add in an animation. And we're going to call it message animation. So hop back into our CSS. And so I've already defined the transition on the base class. So transition to seconds and ease in and out all. And so let's start to build this out. And before I do that, just think in our mind what we're actually going to be building out. So what is the event that we're looking for? So we're looking for basically ngMessage to be added to the DOM and to be taken off the DOM. So we're actually keying on that particular ngMessage showing up in the DOM to queue the user. So in that case, it's ngEnter and ngLeave. So I'll start here, and we'll go with ngEnter, and we'll also go with ngLeave. And then let's think about what are the events we need to listen for, or rather the states. So we have enter and leave for our events, and then we have the state of ngEnter active. So I'm just going to start here. We'll just stack this up. And one more here. Okay. So from ngEnter, let's start with an opacity of 0. And we know that when the element is left, we also want it to be an opacity of 0. So now, naturally, we can go when the class has been actively applied or the animation has been actively completed, we want to be at an opacity of 1. The same thing for when it's leaving, we're going to start at an opacity of 1 and we'll end at an opacity of 0. So I've spread this out so that it kind of reads, or it's sequenced in a way that kind of makes sense. As we'll start with an opacity of 0, and we'll end with an opacity of 1, so it'll go basically from transparent to opaque, and vice versa when we leave. So let's just go here and see what we've managed to accomplish. And so now, in a few lines of CSS, you can see that these things are fading in. Hopefully over the video, I guess I could slow it up just a bit. Let's just go with maybe 4 seconds here and just see. Let's just slow this up just a bit more. We'll say this, that animations are, technically you can, it's really easy to wrap your mind around, but there's a lot of just playing around and giving or getting the sense of what works well and almost giving your application a personality. And I'll actually show you a site that I've done with one of my friends who does a lot of Hollywood movie sites. And you can kind of see, that being the endpoint, how far you can actually take it. So so you can see these things kind of sliding in and out, and pretty easy. So I'm going to actually put this back down to 2 seconds here, and we can animate, more than one property. I don't want you to think that it's simply, all we can do is an opacity from 0 to 1. Let's go ahead and do margin top. And so we're saying when we start, we want it to be the margin top to be a negative 20 pixels. So we actually want this to slide in. So we'll go here, and then when it's done, we will set it to 0, and we'll just copy this. We'll go like this. Okay, let's refresh the page. You can see now that it slides in. So I'm just going to put my email address in, and then when you basically the focus is out, then that class is removed and it slides away and fades out. And then how that's happening, the triggers are, this is essentially we're basically using the form directive, the ng messages to do that, and all we have to worry about is just fading it in, fading it out, however we want to do that. And this is the sum of that. We just say start from 0, start from the top, and fade in and drop down. So moving on to our next example, and I have exactly 10 minutes to get through 2 more examples, so I'm probably not going to type too much here, but I will just offer some commentary. So we're going to go here, and what we have is this super awesome, apparently since Shai went over by like 40 minutes, I get to go over by like 10 minutes, so that's pretty awesome. We have kind of this tabbed interface here, and with Angular, this is really easy. Like trying to actually write this, kind of by hand a couple years ago would have been much, much harder. But I have this tabbed thingy that I built that is simply saying ng repeat, slide over slides, and I'm just using ng hide to toggle when, like, what is the current slide. And so, yes, this is, if anybody's ever seen John Lindquist, this is John Lindquist. If anybody's ever seen Joel Hooks, this is Joel Hooks. And apparently sometimes people tell me I look like this guy. So anyways, all we're doing is when you click on these tabs, then it clicks through and it's basically hiding the other ones and showing the one that you just clicked. And in here, I've actually done three versions of this. So we'll just go to the transitions one. This is mostly about actually sequencing, and I want to show you how to use actually timeline to do that. But here we're just simply saying, again, we're basically going to hide. Let's start with the opacity of 0, and we'll go there. So when I refresh the page, pretty simple. So ng hide is a little funny. You have to set the display block important because of the way that the sequencing with the actual CSS as it applies that class. We have to actually override it. And but again, opacity 0 to 1 when it's been added. And so really simple. Again, if you're doing any kind of ngIf, ngHide, like definitely like just add in this animation. Like it's so easy. And then we have the same thing here, just doing the exact same thing with transitions. But let's get to the good stuff. And so Jeff wants to know, how do we do all this with inline styles in Angular 2? And my question to Jeff is, what is Angular 2? When I see it, I will know. Winky face. All right, so what I've done here is I've defined a slide animation. I'm going to just close these to conserve real estate and make sure that I'll comment this out and we'll comment this out. So now we're going to do this using JavaScript, but I'm going to show you how to use the GreenSock timeline tool to really step this up. And so what I've done here, I've defined the animation as .slide animation, and I am pinning on ngHide. So that is what I want to basically listen for. So we're actually, before add class, remove class, and we're looking for ngHide. If it's not ngHide, then it's done. And so here, one interesting little bit of information is that you can actually grab the scope object for the element. And so element.scope. And why I'm doing that is because here I'm actually setting the direction. So once we get to this may not, actually, I may have to, once I complete this animation, this will make sense, is basically if you click from left to right, then I want it to animate a certain way. And if you go back or the other way, I want it to animate from left to right. And so that's what we're doing, is that depending on the index, so if you're like index 1, tab 1, you go to 2, I want it to animate left to right. But then say you're on tab 2 and you go to example, tab 1, I want it to slide from left to right or right to left. So I think that'll make sense in just a moment. And so just a pro tip, if you actually need to set properties on the controller that's the elements on, then you can actually access that doing element.scope, as well as I'll use element.parent.width to get the width. But what we really want to do is when we transition in, I want to actually animate these things in sequence. And so we're going to go here. And the first thing that we're going to do is instantiate a new instance of timeline light. Okay. So now that this is here, and also just real quick, pay attention to the syntax here. So we got this, it's basically element that you want to animate, the duration, and then you have this animation object. From here, the syntax is very, very similar. So we're going to go from to element 0.5, and we're going to go, we want to animate to basically set the property of the left to our start point. And we're going to go ease. Just see here. It's probably going to be the only one that I type out. I'll actually stack everything else and just paste it in so we don't have to do this for time's sake. Ease in out. And I found that it works best to call the done handler on the first one, even though you are sequencing this. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paste 3 more of these in here, and then we'll talk about what they actually do. Okay, and so I'm taking the entire element and I'm basically easing it. I'm basically moving it from the left, from the start point, and then I am, did I do this right? Hold on. Oh, I missed something. Hold on. This is what I get for, I forgot the, 1 second. So from to, you have to have your from point, which is the start. That's where I messed up. So when you're doing from to, you actually have to do your start point and your end point. There we go. So I'm simply saying from the left, create the start point. So it could be negative or positive. We'll see this in just a minute. And then we're going to 0 and so on. So now what we're doing is we're using this element find, and we're going to grab the title, the subtitle, and the avatar. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to stack this in. So what happens is it slides in, then it does this one, and then it will do this one, and it will do this one, and just run these animations in order. So literally, you're using this timeline to say, do this animation, this animation, this animation, and this animation. So hopefully this works, and my reputation will remain intact. And so you can see here that it's sliding in the main element, then it's grabbing the title, the subtitle, and the avatar, and it is animating these in. But this is really just a composition of a bunch of very simple techniques that we've been covering over the course of this talk. Is originally we could just slide the entire thing in, but now we can say, well, let's kind of sequence this out a little bit and do the title, the subtitle, and the avatar. So I think that's pretty cool. Definitely, please, take this code, play around with it, and I say this in almost all my talks, but if anybody takes my code examples and they go make lots of money, please let me know. I encourage you to do that, and I would it would almost be like somebody recognizing you in the airport, like, hey, you're so and so. If I ever saw this in a website, I probably would just get on the table and dance. So play around with this. You can tweak it however you want. But going back to the code just real quick, it's just a matter of, if you understand how to do a simple green stock animation, for instance, 2, that you can use the timeline to just stack those together, and it's very good about sequencing those. And so one more animation, and then we're going to do an outro. Let's go to this one. What we have here is these cards here that they're not doing anything right now, but we have an answer animation. So before I click over, this is going to be a JavaScript animation. So just think about in your mind what this is going to look like. So it's going to be, whatever our module is, Hello Greenstock, or app, probably is what I've referenced to, .animation. What is the name of this going to be? And the answer will be .answer animation. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to use Tweenlight to just set a few kind of 3D-ish things. So we're going to set a perspective. We're going to set the transform style. We're going to grab the back here, and we're going to set the rotation to -180. So we're saying leave the front as is, but take the rotation Y and on the back piece of this and set it to -180. As well as we're going to set the back face visibility to hidden. So when it's flipped over, we're going to turn that off on the back and front. So just to review the HTML real quick, we have the card. So we have the card wrapper, the card, and then we have a front and a back. And so from here, I've just set some basic things on basically on these elements. Now, let's go ahead and add in some animations here. So we'll go to Tweenlight 2, and we're going to animate the element. Or actually, not the element. We're going to animate the card. So we're going to go .find .card. Let's go for 1.2 seconds. So we'll kind of let this one breathe. And I'll just break this onto a new line so we can see it. And we want to rotate on Y by 180 degrees. Ease. So let's go ahead and use the back ease out formula there. And on complete, we'll go with done. And let's go into here. And we're going to set this back to 0. refresh the page and see if I did this right. And so now we've got kind of this cool 3D flippy thing. And we've managed to do this in just a few lines of JavaScript, as well as we haven't had to destroy the DOM to do this either. We've just said, you have to set a perspective, transform style. So these are things I had to look up and read the docs, but within probably 30 minutes of playing around with this is I figured out how to use this doing tween light. Is that I'm simply animating on this rotation Y property by 180. And so, if you're ever at a hackathon, you're doing like a memory game or something, please take this. This is really easy to use. And again, I think people think that I'm an engineer, I'm a programmer, animations are hard, that's for the visual guys. That if anything, my goal for this talk is to show you that you can ngAnimate and just even a cursory understanding of CSS styles and animations, that it's really easy to to kind of hook these things in, and it almost appears like it's sleight of hand. You're not having to rip up your application. You're just simply kind of embellishing and extending the application. I'll show you one other one just real quick. This is going to be for the folks out there to to kind of pull down and play with. Let me see here. GitHub Simpleton. So this is from the ngConf last year. I did an animation workshop, and so I just pasted this in the links here. And so this is another good one to pull down. And I'll just put this in the slides here, or just move this over. And what we have is a very basic full-page website, and it doesn't do a lot other than just you got these images and you just are clicking through. What you can do is check out these various branches, and things start to animate, and you can do things. So as you can imagine, we're doing animations here. And so again, your base animation or your base class, your event, and your state. And so these are all really, really simple. And you start to see this is actually we're just composing these concepts together to do interesting things. But once you kind of see the wizard behind the curtain, you realize that's actually pretty approachable. And I love for everybody to kind of try these things and pull this code down and play with it. And I'll show you one other thing real quick. This is just a bit of a teaser. I'll show you something that I'm working on. And a bit of a backstory is my love for animations. I do a lot of work with my friend Shane Melke, and we'll just load this site up. So this guy really pushes me in terms of animations and what is possible. And so we've done a lot of websites together. So as soon as this loads, I will kind of illustrate the point here. So he does stuff like Mad Max, the Hunger Games. We did the US Opens, Transformers 4, and a ton of these different things. So Shane is just, in my opinion, one of the best designers, one of the best animators in the world in terms of web design, and he's done a lot of really amazing sites. So actually, I'll show you this one just real quick, and then I'll show you kind of this final thing, and we'll kind of go from there. Is he created, and hopefully they're here. They may have been taken down. I'm going to be so disappointed. Oh, wait. I know where it's at. All right, wait a second. So this is something he did for the US Open. And so we're talking about adding, animating ng message, but then you have things like this. And this is, kind of the stuff that he does a lot of. And so I look at this, I'm just I don't even know how you think in those terms. Okay, so at the end of the road, for me, or kind of what you can do, is we set about to do an actual workshop that we're putting together. So keep your eyes open for this. This is actually going to be a video series that we're going to do. And this is this kind of a site built with Angular and Greenstock. And so if you're on my blog, just keep your eyes open, and I'll be releasing this soon. But this is kind of the full manifestation of what you can do in Angular, which I think is funny, because when Angular was first created and I did that silly ball example, and it's like, why would you want to do that? Well, animations in Angular offers something for everyone, including the designer types who are doing kind of these full page websites. And the interesting thing about this is Shane did the layout, I put the hooks in, and then he went back and did the animations. And so it's a really nice workflow of me just hooking in the animations and say, okay, these are where you put your Greenstock animations. He went in, did it, done. And he does JavaScript, but that's not his forte, but we were able to hook that in. And so anyways, keep your eyes open for this. I'll be launching this soon. And we are going to just wrap this up, because that is all the material that I have. Thank you, everyone. And I request the highest of 5s. And I suppose I could stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah, it looks like there are a couple of questions here.
Sure.
The first one was actually a request for the JS fiddle that you had at the beginning of your talk with all the balls bouncing around or whatever.
Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, let me just paste this in here.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is the one that Alex got me kicked out of the club. But if you go to my blog on Hungry Mind, I actually talk about how to build this out. And so it's a little bit outdated. I probably wouldn't do this now because we have ngAnimate. But then this is also the link to how I did that. And so again, I just wanted to show some real practical examples that I've used in production. I've blogged a lot about this on my blog, and nothing would make me happier than for, just as Shai was saying, I want everybody to just write one test. My goal is that everybody would see this and just add one animation into their site. And I think it's easy, it's approachable, and I appreciate your time, and hopefully everybody learned something.
Yeah, there was also a request for the page that had the US Open animations that it took you a minute to find.
All of that stuff is off of my friend Shane's site. And let's see, where did he put that? I'll just see if I can find this directly here. Yeah, here we go. And when I saw this US Open animations, it's like, I'm done with line of business apps. I'm going to just go animate for the rest of my life. This was that was the effect that it had on me. But
sweet. And then people are still asking about Angular 2. So
I've talked to Matthias. I know he's working on an Angular 2 version of ngAnimate. And as soon as that is available, I'm going to start blogging about it. That is, I think, the piece that I'm most interested in. But we are I think they're really kind of trying to tackle the big pieces first, and go from there. So, as soon as I know, everybody else would know. And yeah, so I apologize for the tongue-in-cheek comment. That definitely was not intended as a burn. I was just being humorous. But Angular 2 is coming along, and I, like everyone else, can't wait to see it in its final stable form.
All right. Well, thank you, Lukas. We will go ahead and disperse. We will be back in 20 minutes. That is 2:30 Eastern Time. So go grab some food, do whatever else you have to do, and we'll be back then.